nothing meets the eye. Autobots wage their battle to destroy the evil forces of the Decepticons, the Transformers. Robots in disguise.
And welcome to SCTV. It's 2023. It's a new era for the channel, for our show.
Hey, you guys!
That's the energy we need today. So, as you can tell by that outburst, we are doing Goonies, the classic Goonies, which we'll get into very soon. But this is Ian. That's Andrew from A Sip of Cinema. We talk about our favorite movies from our childhood, how they affected us, reflecting on it as adults, things like that. So join us as we take a sip on something and talk movies. So speaking of which, I'm dry this month. So where's my camera? Okay. So I've got a Pepsi because I have a print shirt. And I'm sipping Pepsi like mouth. What are you sipping on?
I thought I'd take it back to the old school from when I was a kid. My favorite drink, my favorite beverage as a child is brown creamy soda. So
oh, snaps.
Cream soda.
Oh, classic.
Yeah.
Well done. So cheers to... I'll wait for you to pour that. I'm drinking this straight out the bottle. I've got two of them, by the way. I'm going to get through two very easily today.
I'm using a Coca-Cola glass.
Okay, here's a toast to Goonies. We're basically the same age as the kids in this show when we watched it. Maybe a bit younger, but you get the idea. And it introduced us to a lot of interesting characters, and especially Sloth. We still say, hey, you guys, to this very day. So a toast to Goonies.
Cheers to Goonies.
Cheers to Goonies. Not bad.
Goes down nice on a warm summer's night.
Yeah, I think Coke is better though. I'm just saying. There's Pepsi Max. There's something missing.
I think it's the sugar.
I couldn't get regular Pepsi. So the shop I went to really sucks. So anyway, you know what doesn't suck? Goonies. So Goonies was released in 1985, directed by Richard Donner, who was very prolific in the 80s and the late 70s. So he actually directed the original Superman with Christopher Reeve in 1978. the year of my birth, by the way. And he also directed Lethal Weapons 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that was basically his project, as well as Shane Black. So Shane Black, I'm pretty sure, wrote Lethal Weapon, which we'll discuss next week. We're going to do Lethal Weapon next week, but and he also directed Scrooged, starring Bill Murray. In 1988, he directed The Omen, and also the Tales from the Crypt TV show, if you happen to watch that. So, pretty prolific director at the time. And so Goonies sort of slotted right in between those films. And Goonies was written by Chris Columbus, who wrote the screenplay, and Steven Spielberg actually wrote the story from which the screenplay was adapted. Okay, so there's a lot of Steven Spielberg in this movie, as we'll discuss later on. So, what was your remembrance of Goonies from when you were a kid?
I feel like Goonies was one of the first movies that I can remember watching.
Yeah.
I think we must have watched it alongside like Indiana Jones, maybe Stand By Me or something. I feel like it was around those times, and I just remember it to being like hilarious and just funny and at the same time scary and yeah. I feel like Sloth kind of traumatized me a bit, like
Oh, really?
when I was a child. Yeah, I just remember those scenes with him initially. It was just it just gave me a lot of anxiety. I remember.
So you would have been about 5 or 6, right? If you watched
I
it.
think so. Yeah, I would have been around.
So that's
age,
pretty
yeah.
young to be watching any movies, let alone Goonies, which is pretty scary at times and pretty full on in terms of the style of humor, which we didn't really understand back then, but I sort of fully comprehended these days. And we'll get into it because it's actually pretty interesting. I don't have a recollection when I saw Goonies as a kid. I just remember just enjoying sort of the childish adventure of it. It was such a unique type of film. There's so many kids films that came out around that time, but I think this sort of stood out, and it's why it sort of stood the test of time. Why it's become a classic, why it's referenced so many times as well, because of the characters and how it was directed, and some of the script as well was really evocative and memorable. Visually it's pretty interesting as well. Even though some of the special effects may have aged a bit poorly, if you're a kid, and then it's sort of a wonderful fantasy film. It's just really innocent. It's innocent kids film back then. I don't think it's such an innocent kids film now. Based on what we know about Hollywood, but I won't go into that in this stream. What I will go into is a rundown of what happens in the movie. So the movie starts with a prison escape where the Fratelli crime family, and by crime family I mean it's 3 people. The Fratelli crime family escapes from prison because Jake, Jake pretends to have committed suicide in the cell. And so he sort of beats up the cop and escapes. And outside, his Mama Fratelli, and his brother is outside. And they're sort of revving the car off, waiting for him to come. So he sort of runs out. And then they sort of create a wall of fire between themselves and the cops for the escape, which is sort of surprising and unexpected. But there's some interesting time capsule moments in this movie, including images like this. Pretty much every 80s car chase scene had these wheels and this angle up the street, right? You also had the other angle where the camera was in front of the cars and they're like bouncing up and down on the road and sort of zooming, which this also had. So this is a very prototypical car
I don't
chase.
remember any like normally like the hubcaps come off.
Oh yeah,
I
the
don't think
hubcaps did
I
come off.
don't think they came off
No, they didn't
in
come
this
off this
chase.
time. Yeah,
But yeah,
yeah, they
normally
didn't come off,
they
but they
come
normally
flying
do.
off.
Yeah, yeah, because cars these days don't have hubcaps. I mean, 99% of them. So I'm sure kids watching these days are like, what the hell is that on the wheel? So you can see the thick tire and the steel hubcap. Like no one's got like nice wheels or whatever back then. So this old-fashioned 80s car chase, and then we sort of cut to different characters. They're doing different things around town. For example, there's football practice, and the cheerleaders are practicing. And you see, what's her name? Andy?
Andy.
Yeah, the chick cheerleader's named Andy for some reason. Right? Is it Andy? I should know this. But the movie is set in Astoria, Oregon, and it's a very rustic, maritime little town where nothing much happens, which was the first thing that sort of stood out to me. Like it's not set in some, exciting American city. It's just this quiet little town in Oregon. But then it sort of sets the scene for the pirate elements of the film. So if you have the ocean, you can have piratey sort of stuff and pirate mythology attached to that particular place. And we see Mouth is watching gangsters on TV as the car chase zooms by. Then Data's like playing with one of his inventions, and then Chunk's eating pizza at the arcade. I suppose it's a pizza place with an arcade games machine. Now this is a pretty interesting moment. We just get glimpses of the different characters, basically.
Turn that TV off, son. I can't hear myself think.
That's pretty funny. I don't know
So
what
that
he's drinking.
scene
He's drinking a milkshake in a Pepsi
It
cup.
just sums up Chunk, that scene, as a character.
Yeah, milkshake in a Pepsi cup. That's what we did in the 80s. It didn't matter if it made sense. But I failed to mention that the Fratellis are actually running away in a really nice Jeep Cherokee. Like for the mid 80s, this Jeep Cherokee looked pretty good. And then the Fratellis end up driving onto an RV rally, like an RV race rally thing on the beach.
On the beach.
And then they blend right in, the sort of merge into the race, and then they start destroying everybody. And then we cut to Mikey. He's in his room, sort of bored and despondent because nothing happens in his town. We sort of have this skull, which I see as foreshadowing for the piratey One-Eyed Willie stuff to come. So you can sort of see the typical sort of 80s kid's bedroom, I
I
suppose.
think he was more depressed and bored just because he knows that they're going to be packing up and leaving town. So
yeah, that's true, because that sort of comes up as well as the whole the subplot in terms of what's happening with the town, the rich family in town getting together with other rich people, and they're buying up all the property to build a golf course and a country club and basically develop the area and kick the local community out. Anyway, so Mikey, we learn, has asthma, and is actually, I should mention this before I move on. So Mikey is played by Sean Astin, and we all know Sean Astin as Samwise Gamgee from the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So Sean Astin at the time was about 13 or 14, but he plays a much younger kid. So from my impression is like he's 10 or 11, no more than 12. But in reality, he was like 13 or 14 at the time. And then Mikey has asthma while his older brother Brand, which is short from Brandon, is played by young Josh Brolin. Everyone knows who Josh Brolin is by now. So Josh was
Thanos.
about 6. Yeah, so Josh was about 16, 17 at the time. So not that much older than Sean, but he just seems like way older. He seems like the way older brother. He's sort of stronger. He's talking to girls, things like that. And of course,
Yeah, he
Brand is
looks like
working
a
out in
jock.
the living room. It's the prototypical jock character with a heart of gold. And then they're like moping around the house, but then Mouth shows up at the door. And he comes in like doing a Rocky impression, which is pretty funny. It was so I can't remember what he says.
He's yo, Mikey, where's Adrian?
Yeah, he says you're Mikey. Yeah. So he strolls in with a purple rain shirt and a Pepsi. So that's pretty much the 80s summed up in one picture, which is why I'm wearing a print shirt. But I should get a
Everyone wore
purple
that
rain shirt.
jacket.
Yeah. So
That
this is like
jacket's iconic as well.
like the Michael Jackson jacket. But they do mention Michael Jackson at some point, which I hope I'll remember later on. And so Brandon Mikey is like just depressed they have to leave Astoria soon, but Mouth, he's internally positive and he wants to celebrate and make the most of the time together. So he's trying to cheer them up, but then they hear Chunk outside. He wants to be let in because he wants to tell them about this amazing thing that he just saw, which was the car chase outside the pizza place. But Mouth says he has to do the truffle shuffle first before he gets let in.
This is the most amazing thing of my entire life. First, you gotta do the truffle shuffle. Come on. Cut it out, Mouth.
that was so weird, but pretty funny. It's so unexpected, but that's the type of thing that makes this movie unique and memorable. I think, like, there's no reason to expect some fat kid to just start doing a belly dance or something outside the gate, but that's what happened. And then we get the first, I guess, what you would call it, like this complicated contraption type of device to open the gate. Which involves a chicken, a balloon, and a hose. So that's the type of movie this is. They're sort of playing on this idea of inventiveness and imagination, just for basic operations like opening a gate.
But I think in that era, they did that in the cartoons as well. They did like these intricate, elaborate little puzzles or like even like trap systems. They used to do that in that era a lot, I remember. Like, especially in cartoons, I guess.
It reminds me of the board game Mousetrap.
Oh yeah,
that was a similar thing, right?
Yeah. It's also from that era, I guess, 80s.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, this is what we did before the internet. We had to like invent stuff. So Chunk keeps going on and on about the police car chase, but they don't believe him because Chunk seems to have a history of telling nonsensical stories, fake stories, including the time that Michael Jackson came over to his house, which I enjoyed. So, apparently, Michael Jackson came over to Chunk's house at some point, but they don't believe him, of course. So Dada actually lives next door to Mikey, and so he comes flying into the house from next door on one of his inventions. But then crashes through the screen door, sending the rest of the game flying. Which sort of is a great way to introduce the character of Data, because he's always getting into this type of nonsensical stuff because he's an inventor. So his father's an inventor. He's Japanese, from what I can tell. Is that correct?
Data.
It's Data, yeah. Or is it? No,
Data
he's
is-
Chinese. He's Chinese. He's Chinese. Yeah.
Yeah, he's supposed to be Chinese, but the actual actor, I found out that he's Vietnamese.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
He actually looks Vietnamese. Yeah. So Data, it sort of represents, the inventive, intelligent, super intelligent Asian character of the gang. And then they sort of knock over this miniature statue of Michelangelo's David, which leads to this really strange but hilarious turn of events. Because so Chunk saves the statue, but then knocks it over anyway. And then David's pee-pee is off. So that is broken up. So that becomes the central focus of various jokes at that point. Because they're not sure which way to put it on, right? So Mikey puts it on one way, but it's upside down. And so Brand is like, "What are you doing? Like, you would pee into your face if it was pointed that way, or whatever." That was pretty unexpected. And so Mouth mentions Detroit. No, someone mentions Detroit, and then Mouth is like, "Yeah, I know Detroit. That's where Motown started." But it also has the highest murder rate in the country. So I think Data mentioned he was going to move there or something. And then they're all like contemplating losing their house, including Data, because of this conglomeration is going to buy up all the property, and as I said before, to set up to build a resort or a country club or something. But then Mikey's mom comes home with Rosalita, who's going to help with all the packing, but she doesn't speak a word of English. But luckily, Mouth is there to save the day because he can speak perfect Spanish. And he offers to translate. But instead of actually translating what Mikey's mom says, he just translates whatever he wants to say. And so he sort of paints this morbid picture of like the dad and the mom, how they have like drugs in certain drawers and stuff. And the attic, there's like terrible like torture devices and stuff like that. So so that's pretty funny. But then they sort of cut back to the statue of David, but the PP is upside down, as I said. And then we learn soon after that the attic is actually off limits. And that Mikey's mom wants his son inside at all times because of his asthma. I don't know if you remember when we were kids, how asthma was like a big deal back in the day, right? It's like
It
if
was
you
a big deal.
as a kid, it's like that was like really bad.
I don't have that memory of asthma for myself.
Yeah.
I feel like, because I remember like we used to play sports and stuff, and I remember kids have their pumps, they have asthma, and like, it didn't, like, I don't think there was any serious events, asthma attacks or anything that I experienced or saw to make me think that it was like a dangerous illness to have.
Yeah. No, I don't mean dangerous, but just like something that was of a concern.
Yeah, it was definitely
like in terms of the kids'
concerning.
health. Back in the day. Which is sort of reflected in Mikey's mum's attitude. Like Mikey can't go anywhere because he might die from asthma, you know. Yeah, I'm just moving around some of my screens, as you can see. Oh, where am I up to? Okay. Yeah, and then Mikey's mum leaves, but then the boys sort of resolve to go up into the attic to see what they can see, because there might be something valuable they can sell to save the house, right? So they go up to the attic and they find a treasure map. And then Mouth sort of translates the Spanish messages on the map, and it's an ominous message, as it usually is. So this whole part of the movie is based on a lot of the pirate mythology that we grew up with. Like, I don't know how much kids actually care or know about pirate mythology these days. But back when we were growing up, like, pirates was a thing. Like pirates, ninjas. Like, you would dress up as pirates, or you would watch TV shows with a pirate sort of theme. So this sort of taps into the whole Treasure Island mythology. And so there's a lot of pirate themed artifacts in the attic. It's a very dark and creepy place, which sort of adds to the mystery and the adventure as well. So this is like the first stage of the adventure, you could say. And then Brand says that people have already gone after the treasure, because the map mentions this treasure hidden by this pirate called One-Eyed Willie, and who had his adventures in 1632. Okay, so many centuries ago. And even though One-Eyed Willie's been dead for centuries, Mikey has this connection to him, like this spiritual, personal connection to this pirate that he's never met. And he only knows about him through the mystery of his adventures and what he did to escape the British and hide his treasure. And so that forms the basis of Mikey's journey within the film. And so the pirates, One-Eyed Willie and his pirates, have stole a bunch of treasure and sailed away, but then caught by the British Armada. And so they hid away into this cave and set up a bunch of booby traps. But unfortunately, they couldn't escape, and so they died in the cave. And then Mikey sort of relays this history.
Yeah, he was the most famous pirate in his time. My dad told me all about him. No, see, One-Eyed Willie stole treasure once. It was full of rubies and emeralds and diamonds. And then he got into this cave, and then the British, they blew up the walls all around him, and he got caved in, and he's been there ever since.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of booby traps in the cave, and the mythology is that One-Eyed Willie killed his men to preserve the treasure. But then Chunk astutely says that actually, no, someone must have gotten out to spread the word. Otherwise, how would we know, about everything? But then Chunk finds a news story cut out of Chester Copperpot, who actually went after the treasure, but he actually went missing. And then outside, Mr. Perkins shows up. And so Mr. Perkins is one of the rich guys who wants to buy up the properties around their town. And he shows up with some papers for their father to read and sign. But his father's not there, of course. And so the kids, the Goonies, I shouldn't say kids, the Goonies go back into the kitchen, and they're really sad and upset that they can't live there anymore. Yeah, so they're pretty sad.
Bran with these Pepsi.
And his actually, this is the first picture we see of Brand. So it's got the 80s headband and the Pepsi and the old school fridge and the fish oven mitt, I suppose. And Mouth is sitting in the sink. He's not sitting on the bench. He's sitting in the sink. Yeah, and so the kids try to figure out how to solve the problem, but the problem is that Mikey can't leave the house, or so he thinks. Otherwise, his mum would kill him. And then we cut to Cyndi Lauper playing on the television as the kids sort of tie up Brand so they can leave the house and sort of save the day. So this is sort of the start of the kids' adventure, even though Brand does join them, where they have to take chances and take the initiative, as it were, and take out Brand because he could easily stop them and beat them up if they don't tie him up. Yeah, so Brand is actually working out with that, that stretchy thing, which you don't really see these days.
Yeah,
It's pretty
it's
big in the 80s.
spring thing.
The spring, the
I
spring.
can't remember what that thing is called, but
Did
yeah,
we
that
have a
was.
spring thing?
I think we did. Yeah,
I think we did too. And then we also had like the hand thing. I suppose people want to build up their forearm.
it's people still use those though.
Yeah.
They strengthen your grip as well.
Yeah, for like arm wrestling and stuff like that. But,
Arm wrestling and like what's that, rock climbing.
oh yeah, for sure. And then just to make sure Brand can't find them, Mouth deflates Brand's bike tires. Mike is like, no, don't. It's like his pride and joy. Just like he spent a bunch of money, like he cut a bunch of grass, mowed a bunch of lawns to buy that bike. And so
I think it was just the wheels that he spent money on because he said he said it's
that's
like
true.
my wheels, my tires, or something. I think it's just the tires.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
Kids were broke those days.
Yeah, that's true. Well, there wasn't much stuff to buy, really. Like, there's so much stuff for kids to buy these days. Like, just judging on what I've bought over the past couple of years, like, I can't imagine being a kid, like, having to buy all this electronic stuff and accessories and toys and so Rosalita and Mikey's mom actually come home, but they just walk past Brand, who's like on the ground, tied up. So Brand finally gets free, but he has to steal this little girl's pink bike to go after them. So he runs up to this little girl and just takes her bike.
That's a neighbor's bike too. That's not Data's house.
Right, is that Data's sister? It could be
I
Data's
don't think
sister.
so. It's a possibility, but
But it's not made explicit in the film.
I didn't think she was Asian. Not that she has to be, but
I think she does have to be. Anyway, either way, he steals this little girl's pink bike to like ride after them. And so, cut back to the kids or the Goonies. So Chuck can't stop complaining, like he's freaking out. He's having an anxiety attack, probably because he doesn't have any food. And they find the first part of the map. There's 3 rock formations in the sea, and then we cut back to Brand and the douchebag, like the main douchebag, like Brand's arch enemy from the high school, like rides up to him or drives up to him in a red Mustang convertible.
He's got that Letterman jacket on as well.
Letterman jacket, like he's just this cliched, rich, like jock douchebag that you always see in like 80s high school movies. They starts talking shit to Brand. But then he grabs Brand's hand and then like drives off, and so Brand like can't brake because he's going too fast, and it's like jumps off the cliff. But we don't see him land or get injured, but he seems fine when we see him again later on.
That's right. Brand, like everyone was saying that he like failed his driver's test or something, license test. So that's why Troy is giving him shit for it.
Yeah. That's why he's like riding a little pink bike, because he can't he can't drive. Meanwhile, back with the Goonies, they find their next location with this old doubloon that Mikey has, which is an old restaurant just in the middle of nowhere. but it's closed because it's like not the touristy season, and so the restaurant's closed. But they see a couple of guys go into the restaurant, and so they wonder what's going on, and so they have to investigate because they're the Goonies. And as they near the restaurant, they hear 3 gunshots, but they just they pretend that it's not gunshots. They just say it's hot pot. Must be some pots falling in the old restaurant. But it's actually the Fratellis. So the Fratellis pop back up. They're hiding out in the old restaurant because they figured no one would find them there. But the Goonies do. And as the Goonies are like creeping around outside the restaurant, Chunk finds the Jeep Cherokee that he saw before with bullet holes in the back. And so the boys walk in to the restaurant, but then they're immediately captured by the Fratellis. So Jake and the mum, they're sort of pretending to be nice to them in a way until Mouth sort of starts running his mouth. And then the mum threatens to cut his tongue out.
Boys, you make yourselves comfortable, huh? Mamma, butta fuori questi stronzetti, eh?
What do you want? A bottle of fettuccine in 1981.
The only thing we serve is tongue.
So, based on what you said earlier at the start, like, was that one of the scary scenes you reckon when you were a kid?
What, this, like, the
Yeah, when they get
threatening?
captured, like the tongue. Yeah.
No, I don't think so. Not for me. I feel like,
Okay.
because you were talking about how there's like traumatic scenes in it. I just remember it as being humorous as a kid, or
Okay.
very lighthearted,
Mm.
traumatic humor. Like, I didn't think of it as being very traumatic. Even a scene when like Chunk is getting threatened to have his hand put in a blender.
Yeah.
It was. I remember it being funny, as in not
Yeah.
being very traumatic, even though like it must be traumatic for him. They had a way of just making it very humorous and make it feel lighthearted and not so serious.
Yeah, not so threatening. I think that's the point.
Yeah.
Because there's a way to make it look depraved or threatening in a way where it's sort of creepy or unsettling. But like, I agree. I didn't think it was particularly scary as a
Because
kid.
it's the setting is like quite like dim and dull, and it does look like it is a scary scene. But I feel like there is a lighthearted humorousness to it as well.
But that's because of Mouth, I think. I think Mouth creates this, sort of alleviates any tension that would sort of transition the scene from lighthearted to scary or disturbing.
Yeah, I feel like if the characters aren't taking it serious and willing to like joke and mess around, then the viewer, so as a kid watching it, you also feel unthreatened, I guess.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's how I must have felt as a child, because the only part that I felt anxious or terrified about was when you see Sloth or hear him, or when he's like revealed. I felt, I got a lot of anxiety from that.
Okay. We'll talk about that then when it comes. Yeah. Okay, we'll talk about that because it's interesting. So the kids sort of sit around on the table. They're like, "I want some water," but the water the mum Fratelli gives them is brown. That's all we got.
It's this water.
Yeah, basically
brown water.
the same color as that creamy soda. What a coincidence. So Mikey's like, "Oh, I got to use the bathroom," but the mum Fratelli's like, "No, you don't," and then he just keeps going on and on. And so he uses that as an excuse to do some more snooping. But then he stumbles upon Jake, and this weird guy tied up in the basement, which we learn is Sloth. So Mikey sort of hides out and watches, from the corner what's going on. And so we get the impression that Sloth is sort of being held captive by the Vitalis. And Jake is sort of tormenting him with food, and it's just a terrible situation for Sloth. And so Mikey sort of pushes Sloth's food over to him. But then Mikey like gets freaked out when Sloth turns around and Mikey runs away, but is caught by Brand. And then everyone like just leaves because Mama Vitelli's like kicking everybody else, like, get out of here, you kids. And then when the kids leave, the Vitellis are like moving a dead body, which is a federal agent that they killed during their escape. So they're basically murderers, not just, some people, criminals who escape from the prison. And so the boys, they don't just go home. They sort of hang around and wait for the Vitellis to leave. But as they're waiting, the girls, Steph and Andy, sort of scare them as well. Sort of sneak up onto them and scare them. But then at the same time, the girls are also scared by a fish. And then they all like run into the restaurant.
So they were feeding Sloth fish heads, yeah?
Yeah.
It's fish heads with lettuce and, I don't know, it's like a massive tray of fish heads and just vegetables and lettuce.
Yeah. It's a really, really weird situation with Sloth. So yeah, we'll talk about Sloth in a second, but because there's a lot to say about this guy. And so the Goonies, and when I say Goonies, I mean the girls and Brand as well. They're like exploring, and then they stumble into Sloth's room, but they freak out and then just like leave. But then Chunk like drops this water tank because he's really clumsy. But that reveals a clue, which is this hidden crawl space leading to an underground tunnel. So it's not just some basic restaurant. Like there's an entire tunnel structure under this restaurant that leads to Willie's cave and the treasure. In the meantime, Data finds a counterfeit money machine. So he sort of has this exciting moment where he thinks he's found a bunch of money. He's saying like $50 note or something.
$50 bill.
$50 bill. Ew. He starts yelling, and then everyone like runs up. Oh, we can afford to pay for the or whatever. But it's a counterfeit money operation. So the Fratellis are running a counterfeit money operation from the restaurant, under the restaurant, basically. And then they also find a newspaper article about the Fratelli, so they can actually learn about the crimes and what they've done. But then Chunk also like sniffs out some ice cream because there's also a freezer underneath the restaurant. Unfortunately, there's also a dead body in the restaurant as well, which leads to some hilarity.
They got Swenson! Oh, they got pralines and cream, and they got Mississippi mud, and they got chocolate eruption, and super duper chocolate eruption, and what? The stairs!
Like this whole sequence of events is really kind of freaky watching it as an adult. Like how close the Chunk gets to the dead body, like so often. Like he gets locked into the freezer with a dead body. Like that was really gruesome. This was really well done though. Yeah, that was one of the funny bits of the movie for me. Watching it.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the memorable scenes because it's like it's a dead body, but you don't feel like it's like a very serious scene at all. It's just a good crack up.
But I like how the guy playing the dead body just keeps it a straight face, like so it actually looks like a dead body with the eyes open. Like I think the eyes open adds a lot to it as well.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, Chunk, it's just a typical fat kid. Like he's very, he's an expert on ice cream flavors and food in general. And so the boys put the body back in the freezer, but they accidentally leave Chunk in the freezer with the corpse. And so we have another scene where the corpse sort of slides on to Chunk again, but he's trapped with him. So Chunk eventually escapes, but he's told by his buddies to go and get the police because they're in different like locations within the restaurant. Because the other Goonies like escape down this secret tunnel, right?
Yeah.
So when Chunk escapes, they sort of talk to each other through this space, this grating in the floor. And so the rest of the Goonies are in the secret tunnel, and the Data has these super bright lights attached to his belt, but the batteries last for like 5 seconds, so it's pretty useless. But Data is the type of character with like all these inventions, but his inventions don't really work that well. Like they're just on the edge of being perfect inventions. And so we cut back to Chunk. Like he makes his way to the road, and he thinks he's free because he waves down this car. Like he thinks, he's found help, but this is a really well done scene, I think. So Chunk's talking to the driver, and so we can't see who the driver is. And then Jake like turns the car light on, and it's Jake. And then he starts singing. Like he doesn't say, "Oh, we got you, Chunk." Like he starts singing this opera song or whatever.
Yeah, some Italian opera song that he's singing. Like
I
he
thought
sings
there
that when he is feeding Sloth as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
that's
thought
a
it was-
nice touch. Hey, he just
Yeah.
he just he like singing his opera song, and
Yeah.
like he flicks
Like, he
the
doesn't-
light on in the
Yeah.
car, and it's just you just see his reflection in the like the car door mirror.
Yeah, in the side mirror. Yeah. 'Cause he doesn't say
Side
anything to
mirror.
Chunk. He just sings. Like I thought that was a really interesting moment in the movie. Because it's not what you expect. You expect him to be like, "Get in the car," or "Yeah, we found you," or something. But he just starts singing, and so that was really interesting. But I think Jake was the most interesting fatality for sure.
Yeah,
Um,
he's probably the least loved Fratelli, or maybe Sloth is the least loved. But
yeah,
yeah, like Mama Fratelli is always like smacking him,
Yeah.
and like she just like never gives him like any patience or anything.
Yeah. I like when
think
Francis,
Francis is like the favorite. Yeah.
I like when Francis, his brother, like throws a pizza at him, and hits him in the face, and they like pull guns on each other all the time. And so Francis like grabs Chunk and chucks him in the boot of the car, but in the boot is the corpse again. So it's like he can't escape the corpse. And so back with the rest of the Goonies, they're under the tunnel, and they see these pipes above them, and they start pulling on the pipes and shaking them. But all the pipes are leading into the Astoria Country Club above them. And so we get this montage of scenes where like the toilets are malfunctioning and the showers are malfunctioning in the country club. And then Troy is on the toilet, and then his toilet like explodes while he's taking a dump. So
I think that's later on, isn't it? Oh no,
Is that
that is then. That is then.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
So the pipes are like bursting in the country club, and Troy like gets sprayed by poop, basically. But underground, the pipes start to burst as well, and so the Goonies have to escape. But then
it opens up a passage. The water pressure opens up a passage, and they can escape into a new area in the tunnels.
Yeah. In the meantime, Chunks is being tortured. Actually, I shouldn't say tortured, mentally tortured. So this is what you were saying before about the blender scene.
The
They're gonna
Chunk's confessions.
Yeah. So at the start of this scene, it's sort of the camera is pointed down into the blender, and Mama Fratelli is like blending something pink or something.
It's tomato or something.
Yeah, and so from an audience's perspective, it sort of sets the stage for like what would happen if they actually blended up his fingers. So I thought this is well done. Like it's this delicate balance between being disturbingly horrific or comedic. And so it's a good balance because even though like just from this still image, like he looks pretty tormented. He looks genuinely terrified. Oh, by the way, this is Jake. This is Francis, and that's
You
Mum.
know, that would have made for some good outtakes, I reckon. Like
Oh,
this
yeah,
scene,
sure.
it must have been because like they got to keep straight faces and stuff, and
Yeah,
but I guess they're all like not. I guess they're not veteran actors, but they're like established enough to keep a straight face for a scene, I guess. But you'd think they'd crack up in this.
but these
Yeah.
guys became established actors.
Yeah,
Like, you remember him from Bad Boys?
yeah. He's the sergeant or the captain. Yeah.
And so also like to your comment about the outtakes, like when Chung's like talking about his like what he did in the past, like you could tell that that's probably something that they could have just made up on the spot. You just ad lib a bunch of crazy stuff that you could admit to, and so that would have been pretty funny.
Apparently, the vomit, like he's talking about the vomit incident where he was at the cinema and he like threw some fake vomit on the crowd and everyone started puking. Apparently, that was from Steven Spielberg. That story.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I think he must have got fed different stories besides making up his own, I guess.
Yeah. So like you were saying, Chunk starts confessing like all these sins from the past because Francis is like, tell us everything you know. But then Chunk's a little kid, so he thinks he has to confess his sins from the past, like not just what the Goonies are getting up to, because he's a little kid, he doesn't know. But then Francis is like, what the hell's going on? And then he sort of starts getting entertained by all these stories. Like it's the funniest thing he's ever heard, basically. So that's a pretty funny moment. Like it could, as he said, it could have been horrific, but it's actually pretty funny. And then back with the rest of the Goonies, they discover these skeletons crushed by rocks in one of the tunnels. And it looks like potentially a trap laid by One-Eyed Willie, because there's a bunch of traps in his lair. And then they do some snooping, and then they find a wallet, and it turns out that corpse, the skeleton, is actually Chester Copperbot. And we're reminded of the news story that they were reading back up at the attic about the guy who went to find One-Eyed Willie's treasure, but actually went missing. So that's the corpse down in the tunnels. And then Mikey finds some dynamite and gives it to Dada to set booby traps or whatever. But this wasn't made explicit, but I get the impression that Mikey was talking about how he found some candles.
Yeah, he says, dynamite. Hey, we found some candles.
Yeah, but it clearly says dynamite on the side. So no one like picks up on it until much later on. Speaking of booby traps, Mikey stumbles on a trap which is triggered, and that sets off a chain of events. And then Brand, he like moves a rock and moves a rock to see if they can escape. But it just releases a bunch of bats. Like a seemingly endless stream of bats start flying into the cave. And then we keep cutting back to Chunk, who keeps telling stories. But then the bats like break through the grate in the floor, where the secret passage starts, and then that sort of creates a diversion for Chunk to escape, basically. Later on, not at this moment though. And then back at the Goonies, they stumble upon a waterfall with coins everywhere. But it turns out it's just a wishing well in the middle of the town. And there's an interesting discussion about how they shouldn't pick up the coins because these are the dreams, like the wishes and dreams of people. So it's like you have to like honor their dreams and wishes. You can't just take their coins. But then Mouth is like, "Oh, I'm going to take back my wish because it didn't come true."
That
I don't know
was
if it's one wish or two
that was a
wishes.
memorable scene for me because it was
Yeah.
just the way it was set and how pretty it looked.
Mm.
It was just a very stunning visually, that
Mm.
scene. Very memorable, and yeah, and it was funny as well, like with Troy wishing and stuff.
Yeah. So Troy happens to be at the well at the perfect time that they're there, which we'll get to in a second. So Mouth sort of takes back his coin, as I said, but in the meantime, Mike is like having this personal conversation with One-Eyed Willie, which he often does throughout the film, which sort of expresses like his personal connection to this ghostly pirate. I say during the commotion with the bats, Chunk actually drops the doubloon, and then the protagonist is like, "Oh, look at this! This must be valuable." And then we cut back to Troy. So Troy is at the well with two other douchebags, and he sort of hears them in the well, and then the Goonies are like, "Rescue us! Rescue us!" Which they can actually get out because there's like a bucket they can use to get out. Okay, so I'm just making sure I'm getting everything in order. So this rescue debate sort of goes on, but then back at the hideout, Chunk is put into prison basically with Sloth, who's watching a pirate movie on a black and white television. So we can talk about Sloth in a second.
Hi, sir. My name's Lawrence. So sometimes people call me Chunk.
Actually, watching that again, it sort of reminds me of when I was a kid. That was kind of a terrifying scene. So, what do you have to say about this in terms of how Sloth is terrifying?
What do I have to say about it?
Yeah. So reflect on your childish terror associated with Sloth.
I think it's just initially before you get to know him, he just seems to be like a caged, locked up beast, like a monster man, if you will.
Yeah.
And I feel like the way that the kids were like interacting with him, how they were afraid, kind of reflected on me when I was watching it as a kid. So it kind of made me scared of him. But yeah, I feel like
we had a pause.
Yeah, you're frozen on my screen.
We're getting some internet interruptions, some signal
I can still
loss.
hear you though.
Oh, back. I think we're back. Okay. All right, keep going.
Yeah. And where was I? Yeah, so I feel like as the movie progressed and the kids interact with him, I guess it's Chunk. He kind of like becomes friends with Sloth. Like they have their like moments of sharing that Baby Ruth bar, and Like
Yeah.
Sloth. Like he's got like these elvish ears, the points, and like they
Yes.
wiggle, and
They
then,
wiggle.
and
Yeah.
he's
Ears
like
wiggle.
yeah, he's and then you kind of have this change of heart where he's not a bad guy, and he's like a monster child, really, but he's still a
Yeah.
monster.
Yeah. And he's really, really strong as well.
Yeah.
Like he's big, he's strong, like he looks freaky, like he just yells and grunts instead of talking like a normal human being. I think all those things sort of contribute to his freakish
Mm.
appearance. Like if you're a kid watching it at the time, it sort of reminds me of like freak show stuff you would see at circuses that you would see in books when we were growing up.
Mm.
Because remember, as kids, like our imagination creates whatever terror we experience. Because kids can make anything scary if their mind makes it scary, you know. And
Mm.
so when you're presented with that type of image in Sloth, it's very easy to create a terrifying monster creature. Watching it on the screen, especially the way it's filmed, like the darkness of the room, how he's always filmed from the back, and like he turns around to Chunk and starts like grunting and screaming and stuff like that. So I thought that was really well done. Sloth is a really well done character, even though he's not in it very much. Like he's probably the most memorable character by the end of the film for many
Yeah.
reasons. Um, and so, like you said, Sloth and Chunk like start bonding over a Baby Ruth bar. Being Australian, we had no idea what a Baby Ruth bar was. But it seemed like a gigantic, delicious chocolate bar. So I sort of wanted one when I was watching it.
Did you end up ever trying a Baby Ruth bar?
I don't think so. I've had
'Cause
other American chocolate bars.
I did try a Baby Ruth. I must have been like in my teens when I was in high school, but it wasn't that great. It wasn't that special.
Wasn't that special?
Chocolate wasn't that good, and the filling wasn't great.
Oh, really?
Yes, it was a bit disappointing. Like for
Yeah.
myself, but yeah, I think
Because you sort of build
our
it up as
chocolate
well.
selection is just better than like some of the American selection, I guess.
Yeah, the chocolate selection these days is insane. Like the range compared to when we were kids.
Mm.
But whenever we saw like treats or chocolates or whatever in American TV shows or movies, it just made it seem really extra special, you know, because we never would have it. And so you would have this distance between us and the actual chocolate bar, for example.
Mm.
And so you would paint a picture in your mind about how good it would be. So back to the Fratellis. They actually make their way into the secret passageway, finally, after all this time. And then we cut to Mikey. He sort of gives this rousing speech to the Goonies. He's saying like, that's their time out there. This is our time here. Goonies never say die. So he's sort of motivating them to keep searching for the treasure, keep searching for One-Eyed Willie. Like, don't give up on One-Eyed Willie. Like, we're here for him, like to complete like his journey, to see the journey through. And so to your point about how this is a really interesting and notable scene, like it just sort of ends with the perfect way in terms of Mikey's speech as well, I thought. Because they could have just turned around and said, "No, we'll just keep going." But then we have this incredible speech, and the memorable line, "Goonies never say die."
At the same time, like the girls could have been like, "Yeah, maybe we should just like bail on them, and like you guys can keep going."
Yeah.
But everyone related as being a Goonie or in that situation together, and decided to like we're all in this together, which is like like a really
Yeah.
good point in the movie.
Yeah, it's a good message. And then to top it off, Troy pulls up the bucket, but it's just Andy's jacket. And then it's like, Andy, you goonie, or something.
Yeah, I think it's exactly right. Yeah.
Like, it's just a dickhead. Like the way he said that. Like, it's just, you know. I
Yeah,
thought,
he needed to get
it's a
like
cliched character, but it's well done.
I wanted Brandon to like knock him out or something. He needed
I
to
know.
get knocked
Yeah,
out.
that would have
He's
been
like
the
one of
perfect.
those characters that
Like,
needs to get like his
yeah,
teeth knocked out. Like
yeah,
at
it
the
could have
end
been at the end.
when he's like talking
Yeah, when
shit
they
or
were rescuing
something,
and stuff. Yeah.
or even like some side character like just knock him
Yeah.
out even.
Yeah, he had a very punchable face, as they say. And so this is a cut back to Chunk and Sloth, and they're watching a cooking show on the television. And then Chunk like throws a baby Ruth bar at Sloth, and it hits him in the head. And then Sloth sort of turns around really angry, and then Chunk starts getting scared. Because Sloth like starts freaking out and starts breaking the chains to pick up the chocolate bar. Because he's never had candy before. And so Sloth is free, like he actually breaks the chains, is how strong he is. So he sort of gets up, like opens the chocolate bar and starts like feeding it to Chunk. Like he's feeding an animal or something. It's really funny. This is like breaks off the chocolate, like hands it to him. And then Sloth gives Chunk a big kiss because they're friends. This is both gross and heartwarming at the same time. Because it's just this gigantic face, like kissing this kid on the lips. It's like, I was like, whoa. Meanwhile, the rest of the Goonies, they find another clue with the skull key, but it triggers a trap that almost kills Data. Like Data's like about to get spiked, but it's like hanging down. Yeah, but
that springy chattering teeth invention
yeah, the
saved his
spring
life.
chattering teeth. And so these are Nike Dunks, right? Not to be
think there's
confused
only
with Air
one with
Force
the-
Ones. I don't think they're Air Force Ones. I think they're Dunks. Oh, they could be Air Force Ones. But I think Air Force Ones are chunkier. But very distinctive 80s style shoes on Data. And the rolled up jeans that are too big for him. But this is a scary moment for Data. Like he could have been skewered. Like even in this position, he's not in a good position. Like if he like detaches himself, he still gets stabbed in his leg or something. But that's the type of danger that the kids were in. It sort of keeps the audience on their toes, on the edge of their seat. Meanwhile, back at the hideout, Chunk is calling the sheriff. So he actually gets in touch with the sheriff, but the sheriff's like, "Are you telling stories again, Chunk?" So it's like a boy who cried wolf situation, even with the sheriff. And then the sheriff doesn't believe him, and then the sheriff makes a Gremlins reference about how like getting them wet or something. Well, that was really funny. Like no one would get it unless you've seen Gremlins, which is a super popular movie back then. Gremlins was released in 1984, so the year prior to Goonies. So it's max popularity at the time. But the call gets disconnected because Sloth is climbing down into the grate, into the secret passages. So I think the phone line snaps. I think that's what it was. And then back in the cave, it's a pee break. They're sort of having this formal pee break. So everyone like goes into different cave areas. to pee basically. And then Brand is like, "Oh, I'm going to the men's room, not the kids' room." And then Data and Mouth are like, "Oh, we're going to the men's room too." But then in the meantime, Andy like wants some personal time with Brand, but Brand's too busy peeing. And so Mikey goes over, is like, "What's going on?" And then she mistakenly like kisses him.
Brand's like, go see what she's ragging on about.
Yeah. Like, how long does it take to pee? It's like he's taking a dump or something. Like, it's just peeing. It takes 30 seconds max. You know what I mean?
Well,
It's like-
you'd think chicks would take longer, but they're done first.
I know, they're done. They're like bored. They're trying to get up to mischief and stuff. And so she kisses him, but she doesn't know it's him. Well, so we think. And she's like, "Oh, there's something strange. Does Brand have braces?" And so we get the impression that Andy isn't very bright, like not just in that moment, but in other moments throughout the film. She's like really ditzy. And then back to the Fratellis. So the Fratellis have actually caught up to them in the cave system. And so the Goonies have to escape through this skull-shaped cave, which is pretty cool. And they're crossing a log, and then Data is like, "I've got an idea." He's not British, but like he starts spraying oil from his shoes. He starts spraying oil from his shoes onto the log as he's crossing, and so the Fratelli boys start slipping on the log and crushing their balls. And again, there's a reference to the Goonies thinking of the dynamite are candles for some reason. In the meantime, the Goonies eventually stumble upon this skeletal piano made with like bones, which is pretty cool. And so they
like
have
a
to play the
pipe-
bones.
Pipe organ piano.
Yeah, pipe organ, I should say. Yeah, that's true. And so there's a tune on the back of the map that they have to play. So Andy is learning the piano, so she goes up and tries to play the chords. So the first chord works, but the second chord is bad. They're at least like catching up during all this. The third chord is bad. So with every bad chord, like more of the floor like breaks away. And so they're about to fall into a trap. So the Fratellis actually catch up to Data, but then Data like opens his jacket and has a boxing glove invention that like punches, I think, one of the Fratellis in the face. Finally, Andy actually plays the correct chords, the correct notes, and the door opens just as the Fratellis make it up to the bone organ, and they escape. And then this open passage leads on to a water slide. So water slides were a huge deal back in the 80s as well. I don't remember sliding down many of them, but just about every theme park had a water slide.
Me neither. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know.
think
Water slides were
It was a
anything.
lot bigger in the States than in here.
Yeah.
Like we just had normal swimming pools, and it'd be rare to have a massive water slide anywhere.
But this is a pretty fun. You could see this type of water slide at Disneyland or something. Like it was pretty big and through the tunnel system. And so the water slide comes out into this massive chamber.
Oh my god. Oh, wow.
Yeah, so we get this scene where they encounter upon One-Eyed Willie's pirate ship in this gigantic chamber underground. And so we get the impression that they're getting closer and closer to One-Eyed Willie's treasure and the source of Mikey's obsession with One-Eyed Willie. And so the Goonies, they climb onto the pirate ship, and they see like different freaky things on the pirate ship, like the skeleton with daggers in both eyes. And it's like skeletons everywhere on the pirate ship because they're all dead. They're all like ancient skeletons. And then Andy like accidentally sets off another trap, which reveals another secret compartment on the ship. And it turns out it's a passage to One-Eyed Willie and his secret treasure. And so we get this interesting moment with Mikey, sort of the culmination of his adventures in this film, where he actually gets to meet his hero, this guy, One-Eyed Willie. And then Mikey starts having a conversation with Willie. And then he lifts up Willie's eye patch, but it's just like bone. So he literally has one eye. He did lose the eye. There wasn't any eye there to begin with.
Yeah, there's no socket. The bone just
yeah, no
over.
eye socket. Yeah, that was freaky when I was a kid. Like what? And so you get the impression that Mikey has some sort of connection to Willie, even though, you know, they're centuries apart. And then Mikey calls One-Eyed Willie the first Goonie and then introduces him to his friends. But the Goonies are really shocked because they're staring at this room in the pirate ship, and it's just filled with treasure, as we can see in this image. Just doubloons, gold coins, and jewels, and everything everywhere. So they start loading up on it.
I thought that scene, like Mikey, he says, "I made it. I beat you. I got here in one piece." I thought that could have been a reference. I mean, I thought it could be a One Piece reference where, like the One Piece anime manga by Eiichiro Oda. I thought that he might have gotten some influence from Goonies. So I went to look it up, and like there's no influence.
Oh, there's no evidence of it.
There's nothing. There's no. Yeah, so I thought there could have been something there, but no.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting that you made that connection.
Because One Piece is about pirates, and like he said it in the treasure room, because One Piece is supposed to be like this. The whole point of One Piece is like this huge treasure that everyone's looking for. So, yeah. So I thought I'd just include that, but yeah, there's
that's interesting.
Nothing to do with One Piece and Goonies. So yeah.
But there is a pirate connection, so
so that's why I was thinking, like watching it again recently, that line just stood out to me, so I thought I'd do a little digging, but I found nothing.
Yeah, that would have been interesting if there was a connection. We can pretend there is. So the Goonies are like stashing treasure in their pockets and stuff. And the Mikey's like starts making a plan of how to escape, but then the Fratellis arrive before they can escape. The Fratellis arrive before they can escape. And Data tries to save the day with his boxing glove invention again, but it doesn't work. It malfunctions. It sort of punches himself in the face.
Yeah, he goes to have like a one-on-one fight or something.
Yeah,
with the Fratellis. It doesn't work out.
Like none of his inventions really work out, and then, but then he sort of releases a teeth snapping invention, and then it snaps onto Francis's balls. And then he releases the sticky dart invention, which we saw at the very beginning, and then sticks onto Mar Fratelli's gun. but that just pulls data into her grasp instead of
Oh,
pulling
but
the gun out of her
she
grasp.
does lose a gun though.
Yeah, she loses the gun. And it was those sticky darts. You remember the sticky darts? We had the sticky darts growing up.
Yeah, they had no suction.
They had no suction.
You're not gonna pull anything with that. It'll be like it'll
Yeah.
stick on a window.
We had like cap guns and sticky dart guns and
Yeah,
all
they
types of
don't do
weapons.
those sticky darts anymore, I don't think.
No.
No.
They could make like within 30 years, I'm sure the sticky dart technology would be really awesome by now, but I suppose they don't do it anymore. And so the Goonies are finally captured. And so they're forced to give up all the treasure, including Mouth, who has a bunch of treasure in his mouth, including a pearl necklace and other jewels and stuff. It's really disgusting where he like spits it out. It's like full of saliva and it's gross. And so Martha Charlie gets Andy to walk the plank, and then Bran goes after her to try to like save her and stuff because she gets pushed on like off the plank into the water, and then Bran like jumps in after her.
And her hands are actually bound, so she can't really swim.
Yeah, that's right. So she was about to die, basically. And then we get the most famous line of the movie.
Go join your friends, you wiggles.
Hey, Slaw! Chuck! Captain Chunk!
Yes, the famous "Hey, you guys," and so we get Sloth sliding down the sail with the dagger like we saw in the pirate movie, in his room with a chunk on his back, screaming as usual, like freaking out, but probably having the time of his life as well. And you'll also notice it's the same music, the same theme as in the pirate movie.
Yeah,
So this consistency between the pirate movie and what's actually happening in the actual film. And so Sloth sort of saves the day, like the pirates would have saved the day in the actual movie. But so the Goonies escape by jumping off the boat. But then Sloth is like alone with the rest of his family. And so the Fratelli boys try to like get Sloth to play jump rope so they can capture him. And the Sloth sort of almost like goes along with it. When he like rips off his shirt, becomes Superman Sloth.
You see, he had a Raiders tee on.
Yeah, Raiders. Yeah, that's a nice touch. Yeah, and so we can see from this image, the sort of the makeup that's used to turn the actor into Sloth. I saw really convincing makeup. Like I don't know how they got the ears to twitch, but that's really awesome as well. I like the teeth. I like the eyes. It's really well done. And so Sloth is like 4 times as strong as his brothers. And so the Fratelli boys like try to talk their way out, but they just like end up headbutting each other and knocking each other out because they like can't agree on how to take out Sloth. But then Sloth like ties up his brothers and like hangs them up onto the mast. And so Mark Fratelli comes up and try to act all motherly, she's like, "Oh, my son," blah blah. Even though she kept him chained up all this time. And then she starts singing like "Rockabye Baby," and then it reminds Sloth that he was dropped on his head like multiple times by his mom.
And that's how he got all deformed.
That's how and then we get, as an audience, we're like, oh, that's how he got deformed. Like he just kept getting dropped on his head because his mom like didn't care, whatever. And then he like Sloth like freaks out and tosses his mom off the ship um, but then Mark Fratelli actually climbs back on the ship and cuts the rope binding her two other sons. But then, Francis and Jake start fighting it as soon as they're free. And then they sort of make their way to One-Eyed Willie's chamber in the ship to steal all the treasure. But instead of leaving One-Eyed Willie's treasure, they take it. So when Mikey and the rest of the Goonies were with One-Eyed Willie, someone was going to take One-Eyed Willie's treasure, was sitting in front of him. And then Mikey's like, no, that's Willie's. So we've got to save it for Willie. We don't take that. In contrast, Mark Fratelli takes One-Eyed Willie's treasure, and that sets off another trap, which is the biggest booby trap, which causes a cave-in.
Is it that causes the cave-in, or is it the dynamite?
Oh yeah,
when
it's
they
probably
try and
dynamite
escape?
actually.
Because I feel like there was a trap, but I feel like was it just the? I'm not sure what that last trap was then for Willie's treasure, like taking it off the table.
Yeah. Well, it's not. I
'Cause
don't think it's made entirely explicit, but we get the impression that, something bad is going to happen if you take.
Because
Willie's
it
treasure.
could have like been the cause and caused the cave-in the cavern, and it could have just been at the same time. Because it would make more sense if it's that way.
Yeah, for sure. So next, the Goonies light a candle, but it's the dynamite, and that blows up and causes a cave-in. So it was the dynamite that caused the cave-in. And so the rocks are falling everywhere. There's no way out. But then Sloth moves this giant rock far enough to let the Goonies escape. But that means Sloth is left behind, and Chunk is distraught. And saying he's crying. It's like, no, Sloth, come with us. But it turns out that the cave-in actually opens a hole in the cave, so the boat can sail out. And then back on the beach, the Goonies are rescued by the authorities, and their parents are there. There's cops, there's parents, there's ambulance, it's 100 people on the beach. And then all the kids are meeting their parents in different ways. It's sort of funny when Chunk's mum shows up and she's got pizza.
Domino's.
Yeah. Was it pizza? Oh.
Yeah, it was Domino's pizza.
And then we meet Data's dad. Data's dad also is basically the same as his son. He's got this camera invention type of thing, attached to him. The camera pops out, and you don't have to hold it. It takes pictures and stuff. So, and so the Fratellis actually make it out as well. And they wash up onto the beach and start walking on the beach. And so the police are arresting the Fratellis, including Sloth. But then the Goonies no, Sloth is a good guy. He rescued us and stuff. And then that's when we get the scene where Chunk invites Sloth to live with him. You're going to live with me now. I don't know why there's no volume on that.
I love you.
So yeah, the sort of love is exchanged between Sloth and Chunk. And so basically Chunk adopts Sloth, okay, which we didn't expect from the start of the movie, but there you go.
Yeah, I don't even know if he got parental consent.
Yeah. I don't know
how old can Sloth be? He'd be in his 20s, maybe 30s, 20s, 20s. Yeah.
But it's is it a big brother situation? Is it a dad situation? You know, what's going on? That's probably a big brother situation, to be honest.
I guess so. Yeah.
And so we have to deal with so the Goonies are rescued, the Fratellis are captured, but now we have to deal with this whole Mr. Perkins situation and the country club golf course thing. And so Mr. Perkins and his douchey son Troy, because of course Troy's Perkins' son, he shows up because it's time for Mr. Walsh, Mikey's dad, to hand over the property and sort of sign the document, sign the contract to hand over all the property. But as Mr. Walsh is about to sign, we see Rosalita like opening this pouch in Mikey's jacket, and she starts
Marble
yelling,
bag.
"Don't sign!" Yeah, or "Do not sign!" or "Do not sign!" or something. She starts yelling in Spanish, and then Mouth is like, "Oh, she's saying, don't sign, don't sign," because there's enough jewels to like stop the deal. Because like Mr. Walsh is like signing the document on Mr. Perkins' back, which reminds me of another movie where someone's like signing something on someone's back and then stabs the pen into their back.
The Running Man.
Yeah. For some reason, I expected Mr. Walsh to like stab the pen into Perkins' back, but then I remembered it was actually from The Running Man. I was like disappointed when he didn't actually stab him in the back. Well, that's sort of. I immediately thought of that. He was going to stab Perkins in the back. And so they stop the deal. You know, Walsh like starts ripping up the contract. Everyone's like celebrating. And they're like being interviewed, like the Goonies being interviewed by the news media. And they look out in the ocean, like the ship, it's like pirate ships like sailing in the distance. And as the pirate ship's like sailing away into the sunset, Mikey like blows a kiss. And then the credits roll. And that's the end of the Goonies. So it was just under 2 hours. For a kids film, I thought it was pretty long for the time. These days it's not so long. 2 hours for a kids movie. I mean, that's like 2/3 of a movie basically these days. But yeah, I thought it was fun to revisit it. You know, as an adult, I sort of see things in a different way. Of course, I thought it's interesting to sort of see sort of the creative choices and, you know, to view the actors from a 2023 perspective as well was interesting. You know, especially Corey Feldman, like what we know about Corey Feldman, what he's said and done in the intervening years, what, you know, his experiences growing up as a child actor in Hollywood and stuff like that. Sort of an interesting time capsule as well. And so much of it reminded me of my time growing up in the 80s as a little kid. Sort of the innocence of the time. So you're sort of oblivious to so many things as a little kid, and I thought that was represented really well in the characters of the Goonies. Any final thoughts about Goonies from 1985?
Yeah, I agree. I feel like Goonies really captures the essence of what it meant to grow up in the 80s. That's what we got to experience. I know it's another country, but I feel like as children, the cultures are similar, and we grew up doing the same things pretty much. I feel like Goonies really captures that well. And I think if anybody likes Stranger Things, this is right up their alley.
Yeah.
You gotta, yeah, definitely check this out.
I can't believe I didn't think about Stranger Things until this very moment. Yes, so damn it. So Stranger Things. So Stranger Things owes a great deal to its aesthetic from movies like The Goonies. Because you can think of all the characters from Stranger Things as being very similar to the character, not similar, but similar in terms of the, I guess, the character style or the depiction of the characters as children from the Goonies. It's very similar in terms of the depiction of the childhood characters and the type of childhood that they led, even though it's sort of this modern reinterpretation of it. But yeah, if anyone was interested in Stranger Things, they should watch the Goonies because this is like the prototype for Stranger Things. It's like
Yeah, this is
the
the
main inspiration.
original. This is the original Stranger Things.
Mm. Yeah. No. Yes. Yeah. Stranger Things. Yeah. Stranger Things had that sort of sensibility as well in terms of the innocence and sort of the growing up in this wider world and trying to figure things out. Even though there's this, but in Stranger Things, there's this bigger conspiracy that they were trying to figure out in terms of the government and experimentation on children and things like that. So in that sense, it's sort of much darker and broader in terms of the scope of the Stranger Things kids' adventure. But yeah, if anyone wants to know where Stranger Things comes from, I mean, this is pretty much it. So yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Stranger Things at the very end. Yeah. All right. So hopefully everyone enjoyed our discussion on the Goonies. Next week, I'm pretty excited to not next week, the next episode in 2 weeks. Pretty excited to talk about Lethal Weapon, Mel Gibson and Danny Glover. Do you remember having a Lethal Weapon poster like up somewhere?
We had it on our door
Yeah.
to our bedroom when we
I
were.
remember just because it was like the movie poster, of course, and it was like Mel Gibson like staring out of the poster. So when you
It was
walk
a
past
massive, it was a huge poster.
yeah, and so you always had Mel Gibson like staring at you, like when you walk past it. It's like a really memorable poster. Like yeah, but that's going to be fun. So don't forget to like and subscribe and join us next week. No, I keep saying next week in 2 weeks. Bloody hell, for Lethal Weapon. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see everyone next time. Bye bye. Yeah, later. See ya.